Disclaimer: the information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GAN's processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
And thank you very much, everyone. Welcome to this Sunday afternoon. This is the North American teachings. Yes, it is. But that includes the rest of North America, which includes South America. And as a matter of fact, by the time we're finished, it'll include all the continents around the world. And so this is the wonderful progress that we're making. And it's a testament to all of the people today on this panel. And we appreciate you being here, and as you're representing various continents around the world. This is always the third in succession when we do the Thursday Knowledge Seekers workshops, and then the Friday Brazilian teachings. And this is the residue, the North American teachings, our tiny little perfect group here. So welcome, and thank you for making this such a powerful meeting. And of course, what really makes this powerful is the fact that we're in the post-Sanya era, Sanya, China, the era where we found gold in them Dar hills. And we call it the gold Gans. And it's something that we can all produce. And interestingly enough, we can produce it in very short order and in large quantities. This will affect the price, won't it? This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute teachings on plasma science. We are entering the advanced transition stage. We'll talk about the Z-axis dimension. My name is Alexander. I am from Canada. It is July the 14th, 2024. This is the Keshe Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. And so it continues. We finished the intermediate transition series, and we've date stamped all the other previous series as we've tried to progress. And in that progression, what we've tried to achieve is to condense all the material in some kind of bite-size form so that new knowledge seekers can enter in and catch up quick time, because we have thousands of hours of teaching. It's going back over a decade. So we can all take our time, however much time we want. But the thing is, for some of us, we don't have that much time because we've already made a decision based on something. And is that something correct? Or have we been deceived? And so that becomes the question. And so we progress on this advanced transition teaching, which is an extension of all of these series, as we've said before. And let's make no mistake about it. We are talking about basics. These are unraveling the complicated network of teachings that we've had so far, which has actually caused a lot of confusion. And it's kept us on the hesitancy highway. It's interesting. It's very interesting. They say, prove it. And then you prove it, and they say, we don't accept it. So at some point in time, not only are we just living in the lowest energy state, but we're, in some people's minds, thriving in the lowest energy state. And that makes life hard. So it's a lot easier when you get up on the horse. But the problem when you fall off that horse, the ground is hard. That's not a fun trip. And so they say that where there's smoke, there's fire. And one of the ways to put out the fire is with water. And of course, so wherever there's water, there's a beach. And then, of course, where there's a beach, there's got to be a beach ball. Yes, sirree. And this was the little surprise that I got today. I found a beach ball. And it was in the garbage. Isn't that where beach balls should go? And so today we're talking about the Z-axis polarity. And if that sounds confusing, we've already had the confusion of the X-axis polarity, which is a horizontal field, and the Y-axis polarity, which is a vertical field. So what is the Z-axis polarity? And so that becomes the spherical field. So where is this garbage field? Because actually there is no garbage field. Some people say that it's away. That's what they like to do. They like to throw things away. Where is this away? So I picked up the beach ball and I examined it, and there was a problem with the beach ball. Oh, yes, very serious problem. It was dirty. It was a dirty beach ball. So I recounted the story of Utnapishtim. You remember that story? It was about Noah and his ark. It was his story, but that was a story that was told on 7 different continents by 7 different civilizations, and every time the story was the same story. It was the Great Flood. And so this story was handed down transgenerationally. It was the great transgenerational wash. And so, yes, that's the answer. Let's wash that beach ball because it was dirty. And of course, ball washing is very, very important. If you are a bowler, a 5 or 10 pin bowler, if you don't wash the bowling ball, it's not going to curve properly for you so that you can get that strike. Well, obviously, golfers know this too, so they have to wash their golf balls so that when they hit the golf ball, it runs true. Straight down the fairway. So we have a foundation of knowledge here. Clean golf balls go straight down the fairway, and dirty golf balls will hook or slice. But of course, beach balls, what's really important about beach balls is that they're meant for water. And so I was very fortunate because the beach ball was round and I had a round sink. so I could wash the round beach ball in the round sink. And this was pretty cool. It was amazing how things fit together. So a lot of you may still subscribe to the Socrates debating school. And so you may take time out at this point in time to discuss round pegs and square holes. But I will continue because this beach ball was quite fascinating, actually. First of all, I'm in North America and this thing came from China. So not only did someone make it, but before they made it, the individual components had to be made. So as disgusting as this dirty beach ball was, it still represented industry. Someone had to make the plastic, someone had to make the nozzle, someone had to make the ink, someone had to make the bowl. And someone had to pack it and ship it, and someone had to unpack it and sell it, and someone got it dirty. But before they got it dirty, they filled it with air. And when they filled it with air, it exposed a beautiful pattern on the ball. And you might have to stretch your imagination a little bit, but there's a map of the world on this ball. At the top is the map of North America. You've got the Atlantic on the right and the Pacific on the left. And of course, there's South America extending. And even Antarctica is shown. And at the bottom there is the South Pole. That's where you stick the needle to inflate the bowl. How handy is that? What a great beach ball. And I wonder, was the air inside the ball also garbage? Did the person who threw out this dirty beach ball, did they also throw out the dirty air? Did they throw the air away? We're teaching plasma science based on the books of Miran Tepakol-Kesh. And so book number 1, we talk about the universal order, the creation of matter. And book number 2, the structure of the light. And then, of course, book number 3, the origin of the universe. And with the origin of the universe, we see the splitting up. But it's also book number 3, not book number 1. And so maybe this causes an anomaly where we have one planet, one nation, one race for justice and world peace. And for 334 weeks, Rick Crammond and the Universal Council have been bringing this to us every Tuesday to understand how we have this variety of many, many beings, many, many souls on this singular planet. And somehow we got here. We got here on the plasma highway, didn't we? But we don't operate on the plasma highway. We operate on the transmission highway, which is the lowest energy state. It has feedback like waves. And what we're trying to do is to get on the transition highway, and that's what we're discussing now. We're discussing the advanced transition because we found that when we look at the MAGRAPH pie chart, we see that the speed of light is the constant transmission. But does the light have a variable transition? How is that possible? And we've upgraded the quantity in the universe to 99% hydrogen. I'm still wondering what is the rest. And whatever it is it garbage? And where are you exactly in this universe? Are you here or are you here? We're trying to answer these questions. And last week we talked about the atom and what it means. It's uncut. And so the question is, can you cut a magrav? You want a piece of the pie? Let's see if you can cut it up. When we take two forces and bring it together, we brought the x-axis dimension and the y-axis dimension, and it began to create a field. And that field can be anything. First of all, it would be a point of containment, but it could also be a point of conflict. But does it have to be? Because we also have the capability of conflict resolution. And so the very good excuse, of course, is that we need to achieve energy binding. It's important because it fulfills a self-serving need. Well, that's good. No one else is as responsible for your self-serving need as much as yourself. And someone else has also a self-serving need. So when we choose to be self-serving at the expense of others, then that really imposes on others. And others have a choice. They can either enter into a conflict or they can try and resolve it or pass it on and have a conflict with someone else. And so all of this self-serving at the expense of others causes a disruption. So if we understand that the physical manifestation follows the plasma manifestation, then because of the variety of people, this physical manifestation may manifest differently in different people, although the plasmatic manifestation is the same. So when we say the physical manifestation may be obesity, blood pressure, or cancer, for instance, then what is the plasmatic manifestation? The plasmatic manifestation is fulfilling the self-serving need of the energy binding characteristics and is tuned to those needs. And when we're out of tune, we call it a higher acidity, and it causes an anaerobic condition or DNA expansion, adenosine triphosphate reduction, and also a cellular communication disruption. But not only, that's just with respect to our physicality. But when we look at the planetary physicality, we have to understand that there's an old rule where the higher strength eats the weaker strength. But the plasma rule is that the higher strength feeds the weaker strength. So this point of conflict is actually imaginary. So it follows the negative charge principle where the negative gives and the positive takes. And if we ask, what is it that it gives and what is it that it takes? And how do we negotiate this? And is this a barter system? Well, the giving and taking is of energy. And when you give and take this energy to yourself, that becomes binding. And that's important. But it's not exclusive because you have to give and take from others. Otherwise, where are you? Are you here or are you here? So in order to understand that, then the energy has to be flowing. And so in order for the energy to be flowing, You can say, oh, that would be so nice if it was just flowing to me. And that's only a one-way street, isn't it? So the energy flowing is actually a two-way street. And as we discussed in the initial terminology series, we've seen that the x-axis is part of the rotation, and we call that transmission. And the y-axis is part of polarity, and we call that transition. And of course, the z-axis represents the field strength. And this field strength is the transmutation energy coming together from the combination of the transmission and transition fields. However, now we find that we're in the transition stage. And in the transition stage, we still have to have a transmission. And since the x-axis is dominant in this transmission, somehow the x-axis has to transition to another dimension. And what facilitates this, and what we found, is that the y-axis facilitates this by also transitioning naturally. But in that transition process, it becomes part of the transmission. And so where does that leave the z-axis? What dimension is it in? And so we find that the z-axis is dependent on the x and y axis, and therefore the z-axis becomes another transition dimension, and it too represents the transmission. So in fact, each axis has its function, but collectively, each function is shared across each dimension. And so this becomes the medium. In other words, the transmission collectively of the X, Y, and Z axis is the medium. And it's not the message. The message travels along the medium. So the creation of the universe happens from energy. It exists from energy. And since energy is positive, then the charge reflects the motion. It's positive or negative in motion. And energy is always in motion. And if it's in motion, it's going somewhere and coming from somewhere. And so when we look at the cover of the book number 1, the structure of the light, we see that the light travels from one mag-grav position to another mag-grav position. And so we can conclude that all things are working in combination. But which energy state? And does that matter? So the first thing we have to understand is that what we're talking about is field capture. So when the X and Y axis comes together, we see that the x-axis transition is perpendicular to the ground and the y-axis transition is elevated above the ground. And the z-axis transition is questioning which ground. And why is that? Because not only can we move along the x-axis and change our position, but we can move along the y-axis and change our position. So the z-axis transition doesn't know if it's in the lower state or the higher state, and it doesn't know if it's in the one place or the other place. And in fact, it doesn't know which way it's going either, does it? But what it does know is that it follows the X and Y dimension. And so therefore it completes the third dimension. So if we were to look at this as the x-axis dimension, which we've discussed on the ground, it becomes part of our transportation system. And as things are moving from one place to another, there is no real reason apparently, for it to move. So we invented a reason. It's called a motor. And there's no reason for the motor to move the car, so we invented a reason. We called it combustion. And there's no reason for that to move. So we call it a car, and we drove it. On the ground. But the y-axis dimension is based on polarity, so the ground rotates around the poles. So that's a movement in the perpendicular direction. So where does that leave the z-axis? Well, let's look at the way the Earth is turning. Not only does it rotate around the axis of the poles, but it follows the equator and rotates around the planet. But we also have latitudes, and latitudes take us from the equator to the pole. But there are longitudes which take us from the pole, one pole to another pole. And so the z-axis dimension is referenced by interdependence, the interdependence of the interaction of the x-axis and the y-axis. So once we discuss the x-axis transition and the y-axis transition and the combination of the two, then we can discuss the z-axis transition. And until then, we're still searching for outer space. So this makes it kind of a little bit more difficult because we have to balance ourselves on spherical wheels to get on that plasma highway to our little pie in the sky, which is only a portion of the maggrav, and we still haven't determined if we can cut the maggrav. So somehow we have been able to get this hydrogen, and it's a gravitational confirmation that we can receive this hydrogen. But the hydrogen itself has a unique characteristic. It has a fingerprint. We call it a spectrum. And that spectrum is visible light. And that light is in multiple colors. And it's physical. So this becomes the hydrogen signature, if you will. So although the hydrogen itself is not visible, the fingerprint of the hydrogen can be made visible by looking at the spectrum. So the spectrum comes together from the gravitational and magnetical interaction with the gravitational and magnetical interaction of another. One is the sun and one is the earth. But not only. So there is a third dimension. And so what does that mean? If we have three dimensions, the sun, the earth, and the universal energy that comes from the creation of the universe, then the gravitational arrival of the hydrogen, the gravitational confirmation, is none of these three dimensions. So the principal matter interaction, when it comes as a form of an energy pack. But, you know, if you have an energy pack, it has to be encased in a parcel. So we'd be correct in saying that that energy pack is also an energy parceling unit. What does that mean? Well, if you have an energy pack and you want to contain that energy pack, then you want to put it in an energy parcel. And if the energy pack is in the energy parcel, you can't hang on to it because it's always in motion. So the energy pack is in motion, the energy parcel is in motion. And yet, when we look at the principal matter interaction, and we say, well, we have equatorial rotation versus the polar interaction, but we create this spherical Earth, and that becomes the z-axis dimension, which is a combination of all of those. So we find that this principal interaction represents energy in motion, but it's a two-way street. In other words, there's a two-way transmission and a two-way transition. And as we've discussed, we are the blue planet. We are the water planet. And yet the planet is dirty. And so it can't just depend on the energy of its self-serving needs. It has to interact with other energy fields. And unfortunately, one of those fields is a misguided humanity field. And this is what we need to straighten out. Because when we look at the energy paths, and we say, well, there's a straight line from the North Pole to the South Pole, and there's a straight line from the South Pole to the North Pole. And the question is, well, which way is up? Well, the up or down part is a polar point of view. But that pole only centers in around the gravitational point. And when we look at the energy paths, we see that these orbit paths are more sphere-like. So we see the anomaly in the comparison between cylinders and spheres. And it's not a competition. They work together. And they create this beautiful world. And yes, it is a beautiful world. And of course, most of it is hydrogen. And that's why we have a pH scale, which reflects the potentiation of hydrogen. So it's kind of interesting that the hydrogen can go through 14 different levels of pH gradation, where each one is an order of magnitude higher than the previous one. And there's a range that goes from stable to unstable, from complex to simple. And as far as water is concerned, from alkaline to acidic. Plasmatically speaking, it goes from gravitational to magnetical. And what about those points in between? Well, those points are all subject to susceptibility. And what determines that susceptibility? So it has to do with field strength. So we could say it's a potentiation of strength as well, where you have a strong field and you have a weak field. And that strong field indicates an initial potential energy. And the weak field represents a final potential energy. And why is that final potential energy weak? Well, because it's been consumed. It's been consumed in the transition of the susceptibility. The transition from the gravitational to the magnetical point. So where are the stopping points in between? And who decides? So one of the things we find is that there's a sequence. So one has to do with the gravitational field forces, which cause attraction. And so that becomes our feedback. And there's the magnetical field forces of repulsion. That represents the feeding. And then there's us. We're the last man standing because we're self-serving. We have choices. We can turn it on, turn it off. We can do this by feeding, or we can increase or decrease the strength, or we can enhance and diminish the positioning. And we have the capability of making those choices. But these choices are based on where the stronger feeds the weaker. And so when we look at the potentiation of hydrogen, we know which one's stronger, we know which one's weaker. But when we look at neutral, which is 7, and what is the 7? Because the pH scale goes to 14, and every time we split the water, it always totals 14. So how does the neutral work? Well, the neutral is the combination of the neutral acidic condition of the water plus the neutral alkaline condition of the water, where 7 and 7 is 14. And every deviation from that neutral position is like a zipper. And as you bring down the zipper, you go through different layers of energy. And this was part of the y-axis transition. So as we go down to pH of 6, the opposite is 8. 6 and 8 is 14. 9 and 5 is 14. And 4 and 10 is 14. How's my math? So when we're looking at this transmission, it has to follow this zipper transition. But the transmission is now above the ground. It's on a different layer. And what determines that? So that was the pH transition, which we saw with the y-axis transition, right? It goes vertically. But when it goes vertically, it too goes up and down. And so if 4 is up, 10 is up. 10 and 4 is 14. And if 5 is down, well, 9 is down. 9 and 5 is 14. And then 6 and 8, well, they're both up. So that's 14. And so it goes. But this is constantly moving. And so this pH transition is constantly in motion. Nothing we've discussed here explains the reason for the motion. But the form artifact of the motion is the density range. That's right. Gravity seeks density. So the more dense it is, the higher the pH. The higher the pH, the more alkaline. And the more alkaline, the more wet the water is. The more acidic, the more oily it is. And interestingly, oxygen is more dense than hydrogen, like way more dense. It is 8 times, well, in terms of mass, but is it 8 orders of magnitude? Because when you total up 6, that's 6 orders of magnitude. When you total up 8, that's 8 orders of magnitude. So 6 and 8 comes to 14. And what is 14? Well, it's 14 orders of magnitude. I think most of us would like to have 6 orders of magnitude of the dollar bill we have in our wallet. That would make us all millionaires. But the cup of life is what really makes us rich. So when we look at the cups of life, and they're not the cups of pandemic, when we see that they represent emotional strength. Well, when we think of strength, we think of physicality. Well, think of someone who's very strong, and think of that strong person as being highly unmotivated. How strong will they be? Or think about someone very weak, and think about if they're highly motivated, how strong will they really be? And will the two balance out? And so either way, this becomes a reflection of our inner space. And our inner space and the energy, the emotional strength that comes into that inner space comes from our core space. And that energy from the core space comes from some nebulous point in outer space. And here we are discussing physical cups of life, where we've taken physical matter and we've created a nanocoating process, which is part of the monatomic science. And we've created GANs. This is the radiance manifestation of carbon dioxide and calcium carbonate and zinc and copper GANs, amino acid and water GANs. And now we can even produce gold GANs. And how long does it take? And interestingly enough, it doesn't take very long at all. What does that mean? We're talking about minutes. Is that reasonable? One moment you were a baby in the womb, and one moment you were a baby in the atmosphere. And in that moment, your source of energy was in the placenta. And in the next moment, your source of energy was in the atmosphere. And how long did that take? So when we look at the cups of life, and these were just rudimentary cups of life which we needed, we found that we could create different cups. There was an emotional cup and a physical cup. And so science has been trying to identify the nature of the atomic structure and to cut it up into protons and neutrons and electrons, and trying to figure out which way is up or which way is down. Some of you may want to debate this, and you can have a think about it and have a seat on the right here. We're going to carry on. Because when we look at the y-axis transition dimension, we find that the Earth and its circumference is uncut. It's an uncut physicality. And it's all-encompassing. And yet we have different pH levels in different areas. And these pH levels represent the transition of the transmission elemental susceptibility. What elements? Oh, the periodic table of elements. These are the Earth space range details. And we start with hydrogen. And then we added carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen that created our amino acid, and the medium of sodium, magnesium, potassium, or calcium. Those facilitated the energy transfer. And then, of course, we had the copper and the zinc, which represented the physicality and the emotional strength. And, of course, the iron, which was the grounding force to our Earth, which was mainly silicon. And, of course, the energy that is, shall we say, manifest as a result in physical form, the sulfur. And then, of course, everybody's looking for that gold, isn't it? So all of this comes from energy in motion, and that energy is traveling in an energy parcel. And the two fundamental energies that manifest on this planet, hydrogen and oxygen, will then come together and they create water, which is nature's solvent. And this water has a magnetical gravitational relationship. We call it a MAGRAV condition, and that MAGRAV condition is round. And so what it means is that there's a charge. And so based on the surface to volume ratio, the hydrogen is smaller, so it's negative, and the oxygen is much bigger. But how does it maintain its balance when you have these two tiny hydrogens and this big fat oxygen, and they come together and they create this round maggrav? And then even still, if we were to shear one of these hydrogens off, which is happening all the time, and because now it's a positive energy that's looking for a home, that leaves us short, negative. And so that's our hydroxyl. That's still a maggrav, but this maggrav only has one hydrogen and one big fat oxygen, and yet it is still a maggrav. How is that possible? And it's looking for a home. And so the energy that came in to shear this thing off facilitated energy coming together in other forms. And so we created this crossover where the hydrogen from one parcel went to another parcel. And the way it arrived, it either was deflected or it was twisted. And in the twisting process, it either tightened it and coiled it or made a tunnel. But the net effect is these energy packs represented energy in motion, and that energy was always in motion. And that energy didn't really follow straight lines. That's how we seem to try and relate with our math. We follow the Euclidean geometry of right angles. And then we have this electron fixation fallacy. We can now call it a fallacy. And as great as Richard Feynman was in terms of his understanding, his interpretation of the electron fixation had to do with the theory of positrons. And of course, this was changed by Yoshiro Nambu, and it regarded the production or annihilation of particles and antiparticles in pairs. Well, at least there's something, it's in pairs. Stated the eventual creation and annihilation of pairs that may occur, yeah, maybe, now and then, but no creation nor annihilation, only a change of directions of moving particles. And of course, they were moving from the past to the future or from the future to the past. What are they talking about? But the only thing they have right here is the pairs. But pairs of what? Unidentified, undifferentiated. And of course, not singular, not dual, but in 3 dimensions. Here we go, the Riemannian geometry. So when we look at the monatomic structure of the nanoparticle, it's an atomic physicality, and it's round. And when we look at the GANs, it's part of the atomic physicality, and it too is round, but it is a lot bigger. And the difference is, when you look at the atomic physicality, let's say, of the copper, and we produce a wire, that physicality is linked like a chain. And when we look at the monatomic structure, it is on the surface of the copper wire. And it is attached to the surface, but it is not linked. But when we look at the GANs, well, it is a self-contained physicality. And so this becomes part of the spherical z-axis transition dimension. But we're still looking at physicality. So what we're talking about now is the change from the surface to volume ratios in two dimensions, where you look at the surface of a circle versus the surface of a sphere, or you look at the volume of the sphere. And so you find that this follows the rule of thumb, where you have 1 and 1 is more than 2, where the 1 and 1 are the feeding dimensions. But the first one and the second one are not the same one, cannot be the same one, have to be different. And you don't lose them to create the solution, the answer, the third part of the equation. So the first two plus the answer are your three feedback dimensions. And you are none of these three dimensions because you're the observer. You're the one who's trying to get this pi thing, 3 and a little bit, to convert from a two-dimensional universe to a three-dimensional spherical universe. And where are you? If you're not in these three dimensions, then you're in another dimension. And so that means that relationships are very important. Now, that's not to say you can't have a relationship with yourself, because that's very important. You need to be in balance. But when the magnetical and gravitational balance is equal, and that creates a mag-grav condition, you don't become visible like water. You're transparent. So in physicality, we are not equal in our magnetical and gravitational field strength. And that's what makes us visible. But those are not the only components that affect the balance of our mag-grav position. So when we look at these relationships from a scientific point of view, it's a balance between the conservation of magnetic fields versus the conservation of energy. Okay. So that means that the energy in the magnetic fields is different from the energy wherever. Interesting concept. And then, of course, spiritually speaking, that's another interesting concept. Where's the spirit and where's the soul? And whose spirit and whose soul? And is it just limited to humanity? And so when we look at the plasma science and our role in all this is we add to the knowledge. But when we add to the knowledge, we add the one of the scientific community and the spiritual community and the plasma community. And we don't just add it together. But we make it grow. So let's look at the conservation of energy from a different point of view now. Because what we see on the pH table is we have an initial kinetic energy and initial potential energy, and there's a relationship between those two, which creates a side of the pH balance. And of course, the relationship between one and the other is balanced by the final kinetic energy and the final potential energy. So that's on the other side of the equation. Well, let's change the terminology here. Let's call the initial kinetic energy magnetical and the initial potential energy gravitational. And the basis for this, if the higher strength feeds the weaker strength, then the gravitational is of a higher strength, so it has the potential energy and it's feeding the magnetical. And so the kinetic energy is magnetical. Even the final kinetic energy is magnetical. But the final potential energy, well, that energy is a lot lower. But it is gravitational, but it's a lot lower. And the magnetical is still magnetical, but it's a lot higher. So the balancing effect is between the initial on one side of the equation and the final on the other side of the equation, where the magnetical and gravitational interaction creates a field of a certain strength. And that strength is balanced off by the field on the other side. So what's the equal sign? So the law of conservation of energy is really can be construed as the conservation of Magritte. Regardless of the change of the kinetic energy and the potential energy, the magnetical gravitational relationship always remains the same. Just like the pH scale, doesn't matter how much acidity and how much alkalinity, it always totals 14. Why? Because the equation is balanced. So when we look at the balance between the initial and the final, is balanced. The relationship is balanced. Not the value. Because if one side is acidic and the other side is alkaline, it isn't the same value. And if energy can neither be created nor destroyed, where did it go? So when we talk about the folding action, we need to follow a pattern. And so this was an interesting pattern, and we found a very, very practical application for this pattern. And so that pattern creates this spiral. And of course, it creates a tube. And that tube becomes a form artifact. And it continues to grow. And so when we see that the interaction with the sugar energy, as it flips its polarity between the hexagonal gravitational field force and the pentagonal magnetical field force, and causes this twisting susceptibility, we find that every time it returns to its position, the previous position is occupied, cannot go into that position, has to move to the next position, and it repeats. But this happens in all three dimensions. It isn't just a tubular growth. It is a spherical growth. And so when we look at the gravitational conformation of oxygen and being the major component of water, and we look at the Magritte condition of the water being round, being in balance. So the gravitational spectrum manifests itself in color and is unique, different from the hydrogen spectrum. But the oxygen itself is not visible. Well, remember, the hydrogen wasn't visible either. So what we had is a form artifact of the interaction of the energy coming from the sun and the energy coming from the earth. And clearly, the gravitational and magnetical relationship of the sun is way bigger than the magnetical gravitational force field of the earth. And then we see the magnetical gravitational force field of the universe, because that originally created either one of these components. It created the sun, and then it created the earth. Well, guess what? It created the oxygen as well. So the gravitational conformation of the oxygen is none of those three dimensions. And you as the observer is none of those three dimensions. So what you have is not only the gravitational conformation, but it is a physical conformation. And you as the observer are also a gravitational conformation, but you are the observer. And so that physicality is part of the feedback summary that you have. And that feedback summary in physicality, you can hear it with sound, see it with light, feel the heat, feel the pressure, see the luster, the superficiality. And of course, there's different laminar containments. So we find that the x-axis transmission dimension can transition. And the y-axis transition dimension has a characteristic of transmission. But we have a dominance of the man-made range deviation, where we say the conscious awareness overrides the unconscious awareness. Well, is that true? Really? So we find that the oxygen-rich blood becomes the Earth space spherical z-axis transition from one form artifact to another. And this is often referred to as life. Life is a beach ball. And so when we look at the transmission spectrum, we can conclude that there's a non-visible viral spectrum orbital, and it facilitates the transition of visible transmission spectrums. That is, spectrum to spectrum susceptibility. So we know that there's a surface, superficiality, and there's an internal substance. That internal substance is a plasma substrate, and the superficiality is really the physicality. So we can say the physicality is part of the gravitational, but remember, where the stronger eats the weaker, while in the plasma science, the physical gravitation feeds the plasma magnetical. But it's a two-way street. It has to be that there are two sides to the equation. That's what facilitates the point of containment. The point of containment is the equal sign. And on both sides of the equal sign is one step beyond. And how many steps do you go? Well, that all becomes part of the z-axis transmission dimension, right? Because the communication antenna has to stay within the range transition, where the release of the binding energy precedes the retrieval of the beneficial energy. The field release precedes the field capture. The giving precedes the taking. The emission precedes the absorption. And so there's always motion, and motion cannot exist without coexistence, because motion is a product of existence. So if you exist in one, you exist in the other, and the motion and the coexistence reside in both matter states. So the tuning of these matter states shows that the tuning of the plasma dominant precedes the physical dominant. And the range transition by nearness and proximity is of the x-axis and y-axis interaction. And so to balance things off, the z-axis transition has its own dimension. And it's not man-space centric. It's not Earth space centric. And it's not sun space centric. But it is dimension centric. The proximity is dimension centric. The nature of pressure is dimension centric. And to be dimension centric, there are 3 transmission dimensions. And it's on this transmission dimension that the message is contained. So what is the message and how is it contained? And which transmission dimension folding deviation do we follow? So when we look at things like quark side chain and DNA, these are historical and transgenerational blueprints for energy transfer state. And that energy transfer state is to matter state, and that matter state is undifferentiated. The differentiated state, however, is uncut. And the differentiated state is a Magravs state. So our physicality is not cut. The atom is not cut. Even the monatomic nanostate is not cut. Neither is the GAN state. You don't cut the plasma state. And you know, if you go into a field and you cut the field, guess what? You still have a field. So even the universal state is uncut. And so when you look at the new atomic math, when we're discussing the relationship of the neutron and the proton, it's not whether it's up or down, it's based on the mass. But not just the mass of the physicality, but the mass of the PM ticks, plus the total mass of the antimatter, matter, and dark matter. And this totality is achieved through the energy level balance and positioning, the relationship. So when we're targeting outer space, we have to align our x-axis and y-axis, and that gives us our target within the z-axis. And that is our reality dimension. And through that reality dimension, we can decide to either materialize or dematerialize. So we can go from this Earth space, a gravitational field, to some other space, gravitational field. What we have to do is learn how to target outer space. And so we are facing a matter state plasma dimension, where one is physical and one is non-physical. One is the feedback and one is the feeding. But both are matter state. And man is feedback dominant from the physical, ignores the plasmatic. And we're only talking about the matter state. The matter state part of the plasma. And so when we look at the matter state part of the plasma, we can include in the plasma shift from energy state to energy state. And then we talk about the various energy states, but don't forget the in-between transfer states to take us from the lowest energy state of heat and electricity through nuclear physics. And we see how low we are, because now we're into the plasma physics, and the plasma physics doesn't stop there. It goes into the dynamic plasma and also the principal matter, the interactive energy transfer state. So as we're moving, we find that, you know, we have to get our antennas up, because that antenna can be a receiver or can be a transmitter. And so there's a message that goes along this transmission. and it can be either a feeding and a feedback manifestation. So this transmission can be tuned through the transition. And the selection of one force is therefore magnetical and balanced by the force selection of another gravitational force. So the resulting selections feed maggrav manifestation. So the selection manifestation is predetermined by that last man standing who is choosing the peace dome of intention. And the range transition affects the standard folding deviation. But that leaves no room for war, because the Z-axis transition balance is to and from the peace dome. So the plasma balance becomes important. So although knowledge and wisdom can give you deeper insight, experience will change your perspective. Misconduct becomes harder to rationalize. And historical reference becomes meaningless. The pH balance becomes a polar balance. Which axis? It's more than just one axis, because we're talking about a plasma balance, and that plasma balance is uncut. So when you look at the pH of the maggrav, there are many points in the perspective scale, and they are spherical. But when you look at the war and you find that it's linear, and many warriors discover this too late. And as we said, when you fall off the horse, the ground is hard. And of course, when we just deal with one pole, that too is linear. Oh, well, even when you deal with two poles, it's still linear because it's either up or down, isn't it? And so when we see how we unravel motors, they can be cylindrical, but they could still be linear. But our planet is a blue planet. It's the bloodletting that's turning it red. But the blue planet is spherical. And the blue planet is the home of peace. And so when we look at the pH of peace, we have to understand that it's not just many points on the dove. It's many points around the world. And it's not just us. We are only some of the points. And that's the point. So we are proceeding on the transmutation testing, which is for the next 4 months, July to October, which is going to allow us to learn about the real energy in motion. We need research teams to advance the science. Why? Why should we advance the science? Isn't that the question they always ask? Well, the question they should ask is why not? And why haven't we? When I listened to the 30th Knowledge Seekers Workshop, that was 10 years ago, the teaching was the same as last Thursday's teaching workshop. And we could say that nothing has happened in 10 years. Well, we're in the post-March 15th, 2024 era, and we have new choices. We have a new selection process that allows us to take this beautiful Earth space and transmute into outer space, taking our graceful inner space with us. Because if our inner space is not graceful, there's no place. $546 Seekers Workshops. That's 516 more than what we did 10 years ago, where Rick Crammond and Marin Kesh talked about the greater oneness and how we transcend the limitations of nuclear science. And the only way that we can do that is the Kesh Foundation, Spaceship Institute, Teachings on Plasma Science has to welcome all the beautiful knowledge seekers to learn about the new selection process of the new plasma science. Fundamentally, the World Peace Treaty is at the heart. We need to sign it, and sign it with a pen, and sign it with our heart, and sign it with our soul, and sign it with true intention. Because when we ask ourselves what causes the transition of the Z-axis dimension, and we see that man is the reactor of a three-dimensional universe. And can man find heaven through the field transition? Or can man go into outer space without a peace dome? Not really. So we're mining the transition dimensions of truth and history. Right now, we are physical beach balls in the physical spherical transmission dimensions. And plasma science needs to be delivered daily via the peace dome in exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the new Outer Space Age. I hope you enjoyed this session. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much as well, Alex. I don't know if I've put together many solid questions on this teaching, but let's open it up for the others to come in and maybe they have something. I know Syed had put something in the chat. We thank you for sharing your understanding with us, but I think you lost me somewhere along the way here. A couple of backgrounds ago, you were talking about the range transmission for plasma deviation. Gosh, there's so much just in that those few words. I'm not sure what you're saying. And again, maybe some of the others understand more. So why don't we open it up? And again, you might have to water it down, at least for me.
I'd like to ask Alex a question. I don't know if I'm putting the right things together. Are you able to hear my voice?
Yes.
Loud and
thank
clear, Gail.
goodness. It's been up and down. I remember in the workshop, Mr. Kesh was saying layering, and also in the book, layering is taking place. Are you trying to get us to think of the different combinations of strengths, that each layer is independent and there's interaction between the two layers? For example, in the center of the Earth, is that part of the potentiation training, or am I getting it all wrong? Different
No,
layers have,
you're
yeah.
absolutely correct. So,
Okay.
you know, the relationship between the magnetical and gravitational force fields changes as we go from the magnetical level, the magnetical layer, which is the outer layer, down to the core, which is the gravitational, and the transition process is manifest as density. So as you go through each layer, they're not the same. So if they're not the same, then they're also not the same consistency. So above the ground, we have air. Below the ground, you know, we have dirt. And when we go farther south, we go into the mantle. And then, of course, some scientists have envisioned we could go down 7,000 kilometers. or 700 kilometers, whatever. You know, I don't think in physicality any of us has gone down that far. That's my opinion. But yet somehow we all have a core. And you know, the interesting thing is when you were a glint in daddy's eye, that was the core. And that created a MAGRAV condition. So once you have this MAGRAV condition, then you can grow. And the thing about each layer is that the new layer cannot go to the old layer. So we're looking at two different principles here. Let's just identify these two principles clearly. So there is the what we call the MAGRAV position, whatever that is. It is a balance of the magnetical gravitational field forces into a MAGRAV. And so the fields spiral out. So one circle spirals out to the next circle and carries on layer by layer. So one concept is concentric circles and another concept is a spiral. And so really the difference between them has to do with the way we look at it. So if we cut a tree, we have concentric circles, but let's remember that the tree grows. So wherever you cut these concentric circles, but wherever you cut it is different from another place where you cut it. So how do we go from one set of concentric circles to another set of concentric circles? So this is the spiral effect. So in order to maintain each of these layers, there has to be a magnetical gravitational interaction of energy. And so each circle becomes a MAGRAV. And so the point of containment is that equal sign, the equal of the balance of the energy between the magnetical gravitational field forces. And that becomes a self-serving function. So now, let's spiral out, and we've completed the circle. Now we're starting a new circle. And we say, well, wait a second. I cannot go and occupy that first circle because that first circle is occupied. You know, if you're riding a bus and someone is sitting in a seat, you're not going to sit in their lap. You will get a confrontation. If there's an opening beside them, you will sit beside them. So you say, well, why did you choose that? Well, I didn't choose it. You know, the other lady was sitting in that spot and I wanted that spot, but she would not get up. So I had to move. Yes, you had to move because if you didn't move, there would be conflict. And is that what you want, or did you just want to sit down? And so this is the point. You have to reposition yourself. Once you reposition yourself, you're no longer in the same energy field. You're no longer in the same density field. So now the relationship between the magnetical gravitational field forces has changed. It's moved. And a new growth occurs. And once that circle is completed, then that becomes stabilized, becomes gravitationally stable. Now that problem comes up again. Well, wait a second. I can't go to the first field. I can't go to the second field. I have to open up a third field. And so the process repeats. So we see this in the growth of the girth of the trees, the tree trunk. We see this in the growth of babies into adults. We also see this growth in plasma fields. And so this becomes the point. We start with a MAGRAV condition, which is a bringing together of the three dimensions, the X, Y, and Z axis, and to create a MAGRAV. And if you were to extricate any one of those fields, it would no longer be a MAGRAV. You cannot have balance by removing something from that balance. And expect to stay in the same energy field. And so you will go down and down and down and down until you can't go down any further. And you get to that extreme. And so what happens when you get to that extreme? What happens when the frequency is so high that you can't tell? Or what happens when the frequency is so low and you still can't tell? And so what is the difference? When the frequency is so low, it's a flat line, no longer a frequency. And when the frequency is so high, it's still a line, but it's a little bit fatter, isn't it? And so the fatter line is gravitational and the flat line is magnetical. But there are points in between. And so each point becomes a point of containment, which is a balance between the magnetic and gravitational field. And so this is what happens when we look at the colors. Each color is a point of containment. And the choosing of that point of containment is based on the relationship between the gravitational and magnetical force field. How are we doing, Gail?
It's yeah, there's a whole lot to think about in this. And when you showed us the circle, the first one, then I'm sort of like a slinky toy. I will pull it out, except that part of the slinky is very small, and then it comes out in a spiral. And I was thinking of the two cores and the earth, and how in the book it explains the layering, and each layer has, well, that's why I asked about potentiation, a different composition, and they interact with the next layer. And that's how we have magnetical fields going out and gravitational pulling in. So that is why I'm asking, and it does help to see what you've got here. I think there's more though, that probably a whole lot more that we need to think about.
Well, of
Yeah.
course, I'm this is just a very basic teaching, but your analogy of a slinky is excellent, because literally, even though it's a spiral, it is a tube, right?
Yeah, that's right.
But you added another dimension to it, and you said, well, wait a second, each spiral is going to be of a greater diameter than the previous spiral.
Yes.
Okay, so instead of the slinky being a coil, it's going to kind of be like it's going to be flat.
Or a cone. Yeah. Yes,
Oh, yeah,
the way
or a
they
cone. Yes, that's
when you pull it out, it'll be a cone. Yes.
that's right. Okay. All right. So the thing is that you're only taking into account those two dimensions. So in one way, we can say, all right, when we look at the cone, we look at the polarity, and when we look at all the planets, each of the planets have their polarity, but each of the planets also have their diameter. So not all planets are the same diameter. Furthermore, what's interesting about all the planets is that they all rotate on the same plane. And so the reason the planets don't collide is because each of us has our own orbit. So the Earth orbit doesn't cross over the Mars orbit, and even Jupiter, it's a big fat planet, but it doesn't cross over anybody else either. So, if you were to say, well, which would be the biggest planet? And the answer is like, why does that matter? So, Jupiter may be the biggest, but it doesn't make it the king. It doesn't make it the boss.
So they all find their place according to their fields.
Right. And we're all working within the field, the overlapping fields of the sun space centric dimension.
Okay.
However, the planets themselves aren't flat, they're spherical.
Yes.
So the planets themselves are not apparently obeying the plane of the solar system. So can we then assume that the solar system is flat and the planets are spherical?
Doesn't make any sense to me.
It doesn't make any sense to me either. So therefore, the spherical component of the solar system is not visible. It's part of the non-visible spectrum. So the flat part of the solar system spectrum represents, shall we say, 2/3 of the maggrav, and the non-visible represents the third. And so the combination of the two visible and the one non-visible creates a maggrav. And it is in a balanced condition. And we know it's in a balanced condition because our Earth rotates in a balanced manner around the sun. And on top of that, the Earth rotates around its axis in a balanced manner as well. So there's a lot of gravitational stability. In order to maintain each gravitational stability, there has to be a magnetical gravitational interaction that involves emission and absorption of energy. Because in order to maintain that containment, there has to be a giving and taking of energy. Because in fact, if you don't do that, then you can't maintain the positioning. So first of all, to maintain the containment within the layers of the maggrav, then each layer has to have its emission absorption balance in order to maintain its layer. Then you take the combination of all those layers, which in effect becomes a planet. Then that planet occupies one layer and another planet occupies another layer. And to maintain each of those layers, there has to be an emission and an absorption of energy. Because if you don't do that, you can't maintain your position. There's no communication otherwise. And how do you know where the one is if you're not getting the feedback? So the feedback is not visible. There's a gap. So we have the physically visible planet Earth and the physically visible planet Mars. And there's this gap in between that is not physically visible. But without that gap and without the maintenance of that gap, neither one can maintain its position.
So it's like we were talking about the solar system, our solar system, is almost like the body of the man. One
Exactly.
does, yeah, it is just amazing. Because within us, we also have to maintain the distances.
Well, so if you want to be, let's say, really simple, you can say that the kidney is a magrav and the heart is a magrav and the pancreas is a magrav. And so they're
Yes.
positioned in the body, and not only positioned, but by what do you call it, geolocations, but they're positioned by functionality as well. You know, I mean, it's fairly obvious that, you know, you wouldn't be able to swallow if your mouth was on your knee. So, you know, it's kind of handy that your mouth is where it is because it's right next to, you know, your throat. And so there's a sequence there, right? And you didn't decide, but that was already decided for you. And the reason it was decided for you is because there was a blueprint. And that blueprint determined how you can survive in that environment.
Mm-hmm.
And you started with a basic magrav that we say was a glint in daddy's eye, but that glint in daddy's eye only provided the environment. That glint in daddy's eye was not your eye. Your eye saw the opportunity and you know, was rooting for your mom and dad to carry on, and you seized the opportunity and you brought the field forces together as a magrav. So it wasn't just a glint in daddy's eye, and it wasn't a smile on mom. It was also your intention. And so that constituted the magrav. So the rules that we engaged in to arrive on this planet, for some reason, have been abandoned. And as we are examining the reasons that it was abandoned, and we see the, shall we say, the gleeful awareness that is transpiring on the internet with all the birds chirping and saying, oh, you know, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. The sad part is that in the absence of a remedy, this narrative is extremely depressing. And so I thank God that we have the Kesh Foundation and the plasma option available to us in our awareness, because this is the solution. It explains how we got here. We got here we got here peacefully. There was no explosion. Mom would have not been very happy with that. But there seems to be an explosion when we leave. So we have, it's not that we don't know, it's we've forgotten. And we don't know that we've forgotten. So, you know, 33 years ago, when I was able to find a resolution with my wife's cancer, I thought we'd be the happiest couple in the world. But that was not the case. There were other things, other factors that we had to take into account. And on my own personal side, I got very angry. And that anger is the same kind of anger when you find that you've been deceived. Because I was deceived. I had the full faith and confidence of the professional community, the belief in the educational system, the belief in the science. And it's not that it was wrong. I can accept that it was wrong. What I cannot accept is the willful wrongfulness, because that is evil.
Pure evil.
And the thing is that from a selfish point of view, I was able to resolve this issue. And so from that part, I was very happy. But then I got into the situation where I wanted to share this information with others. And frankly, I got the shock. And I can't say that I've overcome this shock yet. But, I wanted to tell people about it, because millions of people were suffering under the same conditions and the same disillusions. Well, not disillusions, delusions, plain delusions. But these delusions came about by deception. And, life is not a poker game. So they didn't want to listen. That part bothered me. That my fellow countrymen didn't want to listen. And all that did was prolong the misery, like Mr. Kesh said on Thursday, So you eat today, and all that does is it prolongs the misery till tomorrow, until you have to eat again. So, how long do you do this for? At what point do we stop? And this is a real problem for me, and even Irmgard brought it up, with her liking chocolate. And I must confess that before the seminar started, I murdered a few cookies. But I have found a purpose for these cookies, and that is because I haven't eaten today. And so the saliva is still secreted, and it causes an upset in my stomach. So I give something to relieve the upset. So I give it a cookie. And it's on the road to stopping eating altogether. So that puts us in a dilemma situation, because I had the same problem with food that I had with smoking. I enjoyed smoking, but I made a promise. And the thing about the promise is, a lot of people don't keep their promises. But there is one promise that you really have to keep. It's really, really important. That's a promise to yourself, because you know the truth. And so I promised myself that I would quit smoking, and I did. I did it overnight. And just to, really punctuate the event, it was a few days before New Year's. And you know what everybody does in New Year's? They talk about their New Year's resolutions and how they're going to quit smoking. As soon as they quit chain smoking all the cigarettes in the pack that they just bought. And of course, that's a promise to no one. And they were amazed that I had quit smoking before the party. is traditionally quit smoking after the party, right? And then, of course, when you fail, well, then that's okay. There'll always be another party next year. So all we do is we delay. I'm sorry to give such a long answer, but the point is that the answer is there, and we just have to choose to act on it. So it isn't just being at the right place at the right time. You have to be aware that you are at the right place at the right time. Well, this is pretty good, you know. You want to be there before the train arrives. You don't want to be there after the train leaves. So you look at the schedule and say, well, I think I'm on time. And then you look at the schedule and say, oh, yes, train won't be here for another half an hour. Yes, I'm on time. Well, this is good. And then the train comes and the door opens and then the doors close and the train leaves and you say, well, I made it to the train station on time. Oh, I forgot to get on the train.
Very good, Alex.
Oh, 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 depressing. Anyway, thanks for your question, Gail. I hope I
And thank you for the answer. Also, with the medical profession, if you will, from 1910, I forget who it was that was requested to write up a proposal for the medical system. And that proposal literally shoved to the side every, alternative kind of medicine, if you will. And by 1950, it was almost all symptomatic relief. And those wonderful people that we have an idea of were involved in all the universities for training of medical students. They changed the whole paradigm. And I am one person that, unless it's an absolute forced, I will not go anywhere near a hospital or a regular doctor's office. And I used to work in doctor's offices for more than 20 plus years. So, and I was a student nurse for 2.5 out of 3. I couldn't take the methods that they used. How should we say? Medical students were allowed to practice on the elderly people. Oh, I got to the point where I didn't want to be in that situation. So there are a lot of things that I've seen and I'm not happy about. So yes, I hear what you were saying immediately. Thank you for that. And thank you for explaining in both ways how the planets work and how the individual planet works than us, but it's the macro is and the micro, they're the same. Appreciate this. Yes.
I have another personal story just to add to what you just said, if I may.
Please.
So the somatidian biology that was put forward by Gaston Naessens was originally talked about by Antoine Béchamp in the 1850s, and he called them microzymas. And the problem with Antoine was that he was an introvert, and of course, a contemporary peer was Louis Pasteur. We know who that is, and Pasteur was an extrovert. And what is interesting is, of course, that Pasteur apologized to humanity for, his views on medical, but he made a point to make sure that he refused to apologize to Antoine Béchamp. So that's kind of a contradiction in terms, but so that goes back to 1850. So that predates your 1910 analogy there. But I was reading a book that was quite dramatic for me because it was referencing the Order of St. John Knights Hospitalier from the Crusades. And, you know, it talked about how the Order of St. John was, which, you know, became the Red Cross, and how it was founded back then to support the military. And of course, it was a military organization. And that was a really eye-opening story. So, you know, when we're talking about the history, it goes back, it predates, it's in the 1100s. So this is, let's do the math. I guess it's 13 centuries ago. Anyway, so when we talk about a transgenerational influence, that is extreme. But the fundamental thing that a lot of people don't understand is because of that foundation, the medical community, of course, is a military organization, and then this is the part that a lot of people don't understand, and that part is very sad. The other thing that is very sad is one of the leading universities in the medical field is in Montpellier. And why is it in Montpellier? Well, the reason is because that was the home of Guy de Montpellier, and so how people were named at that point, I guess the first name was their name, and the second name was where they were from. So, to differentiate, Guy from Paris, or, Guy from London. Anyway, so this was Guy de Montpellier, and of course that was the founding of the Montpellier University, and it is still a medical university to this day. But this is where Antoine Béchamp and Louis Pasteur, duked it out in 1850. So this is an interesting part of the story, but that's not the part that is interesting to me. Because what was interesting to me was that I was reading a book, and I was reading it about the University of Montpellier and the Order of St. John, and to my mind came the name Guy de Montpellier. And I was reading rather quickly, and I thought, this is strange. Where did I see that? And so I started to thumb back through the pages to recount the narrative and try and find a passage that was referring to Guy de Montpellier, and I couldn't find it, and I started to really get upset because I wanted to confirm the connection, and I couldn't. So here I was halfway through the book, and I'm trying to find this connection. I can't find the connection. Sorry to make this story so long, but the important point is that I actually reread the book from front to back and from back to front about 3 times, trying to find this cross reference, and through the index, through the reference section. However, couldn't find it, and this really bothered me, because there was no reason for me to come to that name. It just came to me for a strange reason. At that time, I didn't understand the plasma science at all. So now I'm trying to figure out who the Order of St. John is, who Montpellier University is, and who Guy de Montpellier is. And of course, what better way to find, and this was, you understand, it was 33 years ago, and so I'm in a library, and of course, you look at the encyclopedia. And of course, the encyclopedia was the Encyclopedia Britannica, which I didn't understand who the author was, or the owner of the encyclopedia was. And I was shocked when I found out, and you can find out and be shocked equally. But I couldn't find any reference to Guy de Montpellier, and I thought, well, you know, maybe I'm losing my marbles. And I was just like really, really desperately looking through the library, and a shock to me was that I found, well, there was a Roman Catholic encyclopedia, and I thought, well, isn't that strange? So here's this Encyclopedia Britannica, which is the only encyclopedia that I knew, and now there was this Roman Catholic encyclopedia, and I thought, well, gee, I wonder if there's a Islamic encyclopedia, or I wonder if there's a Jewish encyclopedia, and no, there weren't. There were just the two. And so I thought, well, let me just check to see this Roman Catholic encyclopedia, because I couldn't figure out what is the difference. And so sure enough, in the encyclopedia there, I find a reference to Guy de Montpellier, and sure enough, he was the founder of the Order of St. John. And that was quite shocking to me. And really only until recently could I really explain how that happened. And to, you know, to Mr. Kesh's point, and Mark played the video earlier on today, and it talked about, you know, his presence at the planning stage and his presence at the execution stage, and all this. And you say, well, he was there, but what did he do about it? And so we find that the action was physical, but his presence was plasmatic. And this is an important difference. So the physical presence makes you an accomplice, makes you a witness. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say. Thank you very much.
Wow. I know how frustrating it is to go to the library. But I'm interested. I'll probably take a little bit of a look on the internet as to what you were talking there. Thank you very much, Alex. I'm sure there are many more questions that are going to come up on this one. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Gail.
Yes, thank you, Gail, and thank you, Alex. Gosh. Maybe I need to, as we made this last video that I'm going to play, you write the rules according to your own understanding. Maybe I'm trying too hard to understand what you're teaching, Alex, and I seem to be frustrated that I'm not maybe seeing it the way you're seeing it. But this is what Mr. Kesh is saying. We make the rules, or there are no rules. It's all up to you. You sort of write it. I think this is what I've been trying to stress. Again, you allow the flower to bloom on its own. You don't dictate to it when the right time is, or how many petals and leaves and the rest. So this is what Mr. Kesh is saying. We're all going to create this understanding based on our, or create this based on our own understanding, and not replicating someone else's understanding. And not to take away from anything you're sharing, I think there's a lot of valuable knowledge in there. It's just I can't, for example, you know, you talk about the X, Y, and Z axis. We see the plasma, well, the Earth rotating on its axis. I guess you'd call that the Z rotation, but we don't really see the Y or the X sort of axis. These are just energies. And when we're in that plasma ball, if we do enter into the plasma ball, how do we pick the X, Y, or Z. I don't think it's, I think they're all mixed up in a way. They're all sort of rotating in maybe different directions or maybe the same direction, but to me, it's a whole interaction of fields. How do you pick the Y or the Z or the X axis to do something with?
Yeah, Mark. So this is a terrific question because one of the things about the layers is that they, first of all, are in different positions, have different densities, but they also have different characteristics. And that is to say, because of the characteristics of laminar flow. Okay, so each lamination is a containment unit, and sailors, you've heard sailors who follow the trade winds, and why do they call them the trade winds? Is because these are the winds that they use across the Atlantic Ocean. And then there's the doldrums, and why do they avoid the doldrums? Because they don't have the wind. So, by changing the position, you can go from the doldrums to the trade winds. Okay, so you're good with that, Mark?
Yes.
Ooh, you're so shy. Okay, how about another thing? You've heard of the westerlies?
The westerlies.
Yeah, the westerly winds.
Not really. I mean,
Okay.
I'm sure I've heard the term, but it
Oh, have you
doesn't.
heard of the term the jet stream?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so the jet stream, whether it's the northern hemisphere or the southern hemisphere, comes from the westerlies. And the thing of why is it a jet stream? If the jet stream was at ground level, you would have to pretty well walk, at a steep angle to the ground.
You'd be living underground most likely.
Okay, so fortunately, the westerlies are above the ground, and way above our immediate biosphere. But planes will use the westerlies, and because it'll conserve fuel, right?
Mhm.
So the trip from North America to Europe is a lot faster than the trip from Europe to North America, and uses less fuel. But the planes are not want to travel through the westerlies, so they will travel over Greenland to come back. And so to answer your question, you have a laminar containment of a jet stream, and you have a different laminar containment on the surface. And it's when you have something like a tornado, when Gail was talking about the conical slinky, well, that's kind of what a tornado does, and it kind of brings the high winds from the upper atmosphere to the lower atmosphere, and then of course you have a bigger wind change. We call it a hurricane or a cyclone or a typhoon, and really the only difference in terminology is geographical. So, but if you are able to mitigate the weather, well, then that gives you a lot of control. The question then becomes is, are you qualified? Do you have enough knowledge? How are you able to exercise control over something that you don't really understand what it means to control it? Because as happy as you are to control it, the earth is even happier when you leave. Thanks, everybody, for allowing me to present today.
Yes, let's see if someone else has a question, a comment, an exception, a misunderstanding, perhaps you'd like cleared up, or you may want to state your own understanding. Again, I'm not thinking lately in physical movement at all, with the winds or the movement or catching this field or that. I'm just trying to change the strength of the field or something along that line without any physical movement. I don't think you need to physically move to explore any parts of the universe or this planet. This is what Mr. Kesh is saying. He doesn't have to move the physicality anymore. He's learned how to connect to a point and be an observer in that point. And this is what I'm looking into or trying to replicate in so many ways. You don't have to move physically anywhere. This is what we see in the planets video. What we see in the depths of the universe, we see in the depths of the soul of the man. So do we have to physically move anywhere other than to connect to fields and be that observer? But triggering it is, again, where I'm stuck. But we're getting there step by step, slowly. We're coming into the knowledge, all of us. Anyone else want to bring something else up? Do you want to mention anything? I know Saeed left, but he did say, mahalo, Mark, what does Mr. Kesh, we can make computer microchips with emotion. Yeah, Mr. Kesh did go through that in the workshop a little bit. I guess recently and probably years ago, he's been looking into this. I know we talked about the GANS computer or the GANS brain and its potential. And apparently we will be moving in this direction of emotions and brain cells embedded within microchips. Anyone have any thoughts on this? I think it'll make the AI a lot friendlier and perhaps more acceptable to many. I know many are skeptical of it because it's going to replace a lot of simple jobs on this planet, let's say, or maybe even some of the more complex ones. All right, if we don't have any further questions or comments or anything anyone wants to bring, I think I'm going to play that 12-minute video regarding you write the rules according to your own understanding. Anyone else? All right, I'll have to take the screen. Is there anything
Thanks,
else?
Mark.
Yes, thank you, Alex. Again, it's just my lack of understanding of your understanding that's causing me some frustration today. And again, this is a follow-up by Ivan from one of his last interactions where he's trying to understand and generate this rotating plasma and feeling the difference of the fields. And Mr. Kesh goes into a little bit deeper understanding of how he handles it. I know Ivan was trying to get some trigger points or something else, but Mr. Kesh kept saying it's all the way you want to do it. It's all the way you feel comfortable with doing it, and no one else is understanding. And this should, if we can accomplish this, again, we can look into ourselves for the answers rather than outside. But again, that's just my way of approaching it at this point in time. So you write the rules according to your own understanding and your own fields and your own energies. I think this is quite instructive for all of us to listen to.
Yes, we have a hand up here with Ivan. Ivan, could you go ahead, please?
Hi everybody, hi Mr. Kesh. That's Ivan from Bulgaria. I just want to continue the previous conversation that we had like some workshops ago, where you said that I have to rotate the soul plasma in the middle. So I'm not sure if I'm doing this correctly, so I would just describe my experience with it a little bit. So I would like to tell me if I am on the right path. Because I try to rotate it like from the left to the right with my intention. And in the beginning, it's very difficult to feel it, but after some time, it starts to feel like a ball or some ball of energy that is going in my head. And I feel the interaction. I can even spin the fields down around the spine. It's very interesting. Is this supposed to be the feeling when you rotate the plasma?
It depends on how you want to do it, as you said. And I'm not there, I don't know the feeling. What do you feel?
Well, I meant, what did you feel when you rotated, or what
I
the
don't
other felt?
rotate it. No, I never rotated. That's I'm not a Sufi. No, it's understanding with the interaction.
Well, basically the soul is in the middle, and it's made. The other fields around it are made of the same fields that it is made of. So if I move it to the left or the right, I should feel like interaction with the fields around it. Is this correct?
It's like when you when you close your eyes and you feel somebody is behind you or next to you, you don't need to open your eyes to feel them. You feel their presence. It's the same kind of feeling, and you decide where.
It is something very interesting that I almost managed to do. I try to, because I feel like two fields that are coming from the bottom of the feet, like a spiral to the top. And I try to rotate the field to push the soul down. And I almost felt like the field around me that I can push the environment out. Is this supposed to be this soul expansion, like you said? Or I'm just pressing the field out, I'm not expanding? I don't know how to say it, like when you push the air into the balloon,
Different,
almost...
You're not the only one. Different knowledge seekers are achieving a different way. Different knowledge, because you're not the only one who's a number of knowledge, because I get the writing they write to us, we hear it. A number of knowledge seekers have started this emotion, some with two fields, some with one field, some rotating it up, some feeling from the foot up. It's all depends on how you feel comfortable to do it, to achieve, to understand the other part of yourself, and nothing else. And
so it makes no difference if I take from the bottom or from the top?
It all depends how, I always said, you count the number of the stars and planets in the universe and unicos. Each one is individual, each one is made in a specific way, and not two of them are exactly the same. So is the same with the creation of and motion and emotion of the soul of the man. How you transmute it, how you transfer it, how you make it physically manifest. And always said, if you've been in some of the old teachings, you take off from, let's say, London, you go to New York. In the time between the two places, you're not a citizen of the planet Earth. You're citizens of atmosphere of the Earth. You're not counted as, let's say, British, and you're not counted as American because you have left one and not arrived in the other yet. It's the same with the creation. There are many empty spaces and many souls in motion, souls of universe, that they have not manifested and that are still on the way of arrival to manifest themselves. And how they were manifested and how they manifest themselves and is what is manifested is what is left as when it's left, all depends on how much is on the way and how much is in the empty space cap of the universe. We travel from London to New York and we are citizens of none, and we have no existence in either point. So are the souls fields between what we see as planets and stars, and in between them as emptiness, where they are the same as traveling from A to B. They're citizens of none, but on transmutation and how did they decide to transmute? Are they going from London to New York with a ship, with a donkey, with an airplane, with a jumbo jet, with a God knows what? You understand? So what method you choose and how you manifest at the other end is decision of you. You have to find out which method suits you.
And I just want to say here that it just goes to show we're all looking for the cookie cutter way of doing this, but there is no cookie cutter way. It's the way, whatever triggers in you, the way you feel comfortable, what you decide and how this works. And each of us have a unique structure, similar, but yet unique. So the cookie cutter method, we're looking for the answers, but the answers are within us and where we feel comfortable in manifesting or how we actually apply this. And I think it's unique to every single star, which we know we all are. So that's why when we're looking for the answers and something that fits everyone, I don't think it's going to be there. It's what you decide to do and how you decide to do it and how comfortable you feel doing it.
What I mean that
no, there's no one way written that we have to do.
yeah, I understand. I wanted to ask if this pushing of this field that I feel it, that I can almost push the environment out, because I feel it like very weak, like I cannot like really make it strong.
I'm not there. I'm not the feeling. I'm not those fields to tell you. It's how you feel. This. You have to learn about yourself.
I mean, is this the right way to go? This is what I meant. Is because I don't know anybody that is doing it, you know.
I answered you. If you don't understand, there is no rule book. You write the rules according to your own understanding and your own fields and your own energies.
But how would this feel for somebody who already achieved it, to put my question in another way? If I start from the end to back, if I achieve it, how would this feel?
I cannot tell you because I do it so normally. To me, it's in second part of my life, or maybe first part of my life. And I don't need to do it. It's there naturally.
So is this like, I'm just thinking of a very simple example, like whistling. You know it's there. It's part of your life. You can whistle by just putting your lips together and whistling. It's there all the time. You don't have to use it all the time, but it's there. So this is what Mr. Kes, I think it's there in all of us all the time. It's just we're so frantic in trying to find this cookie cutter method of doing it that we miss what triggers ourselves, perhaps. Just a thought.
You understand? But it's come from the experience. It's come from trying. I used to transmute, or whatever you call it, fly or whatever, since I was 8, 9, 10. I made an art of it, how to fly in a physical dimension. I used to put my hand next to me, I used to go, let's go up and see how far you go. Let's go somewhere else. And then my brother, bless his soul, he said, where are you going? Sometimes you're not to bed. I said, I go to toilet, because I wasn't in bed when he used to wake up. He comes to come to brother, and I wasn't in my bed. I learned this technique, and now I don't actually need to leave the physical body. I go, it's here, but it's everywhere else. I have sat in cabinet meetings without anyone knowing, and I know what decisions they made, because I wanted to be there to know what decision is.
So you mean that when we transmute, you can leave the body out just to sleep, and you can go wherever you want?
Either way, depends how, what you learn and what you're good at. Depends what you're good at. You still have at the end of it, come to physicality and carry it out in physical condition. You understand? Because in this moment of time, the science does not accept, all people don't, they call it a dream, they call it, oh, whatever. Man is not mature to understand. This is what I keep on saying. I've said many, when people came to this, to Lens, I told them, whatever you say, we accept, because you taking the journey. It's your soul who's traveled, not mine.
Okay, thank you. I think I will practice more and we'll see what comes out of it.
Yeah, you have to learn to practice make it perfect. But it's about you and nobody else. That's why it cannot be any religion in space, because everything is individual, cut by you for you. But if you follow the ethos, you have to understand the reason you're doing it. And then you find out there's another way to do it. Trying to achieve, to satisfy your capabilities or ability, is much harder than trying to elevate someone else with it. Any other question? Recall.
Okay, so again, it's all depending on how you understand it and how you apply it, and you write your own rule book. Anyone want to make any comments about this? Okay, it's just something for all of us to think about. Again, that cookie cutter example, there's no one size fits all. I think we need to remember that in our understanding of the plasma, especially in the movement of the energies. It's what triggers you and what you feel comfortable with. I want to thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Alex, for bringing another in-depth teaching. And as we've been used to saying here, may you be proud of the work you do, and may you be proud of the person you are, and may you be proud of the difference you make We haven't seen a big difference made, but we know we're building and building up momentum into that direction. And of course, always keep the three wise men close to you. I think they create a huge shielding effect, a balancing effect by thinking good and speaking good and acting good. But again, this is for you to apply. No one else can apply them for you. It's up to you and your understanding and what it means to you. So we thank you all for being here, carrying, and again, it's not a coincidence that you're here. Your soul has brought you here for a bigger dimension of work, which will come in the upcoming time, or perhaps in the next few months or years. We'll have to see how this all shakes out. But as I said earlier, I think the most important work we can do right now is to use your energies to elevate other souls in certain positions on this planet, and we all know who we're talking about. And I think we should add in the scientific world as well, that a breakthrough can happen with many of these scientists in their understanding or their acceptance of this. I know the Chinese government actually removed some scientists who were opposed to, or saying they can't understand it and it doesn't work, but I think they were overridden. Hopefully they'll be overridden in other countries too, because this technology needs to be brought out on this planet. And we're doing the work, we're in the background, we're elevating the souls, and we're understanding more. And at some point, we'll be able to teach this and with a full understanding. So thank you all for giving a few hours of your life today and every Sunday that you're here. And of course, it's just to add to our knowledge that we can then share with the others.